first episode of Back to Basics podcast. I'm super excited to have you here. I'm Jeff Helfrich, State Representative for House District 52. Life's messy. Government's even messier. I have seen what works on the street as a police officer and what didn't. And I'm seeing the same thing in the Capitol since I've been here. What I want to do is cut through the noise, cut through the red tape, and get us back to basics so we are able to be a functioning government so everybody can get on with their lives and have less government intrusion. With that, my first episode is with Senator Mike McLane, my mentor. From his time in a small town in Condon to becoming a state senator, his travels through the military, a law firm, and being a judge. All those things help shape his life and move him in a direction about government and making it smaller and more efficient. So with that, let's get to the interview.
All good, right?
Recording already, huh? Hey everybody, my name is Jeff Helfrich. I'm the State Representative for House District 52, and I have my Back to Basics podcast, which is real experiences for real results. And today, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, my path to the state legislature. I was, born outside of Denver, went back to the family farm and ranch, and worked there for quite a few years until I hit about 18, 19 years old. Joined the Air Force, and 4 years, 7 countries, a conflict and a war really helped shape my life. I was a law enforcement canine handler in the Air Force. My puppy dog went and found explosives, so that kind of gave you a pucker factor when he sat. Like, oh no, here we go. Not a good day for the EOD people. But that said, I became a police officer in the city of Portland. 25 and a half years of, that job with that badge was the ticket to the greatest show on earth. I got to sit there and have a front row seat to life and have the ability to watch the best and worst in people, and it could do it in a day or over a course of a career. And I got to see heroic actions and what true evil looked like, and really what that line of chaos to law and order is. And little did I know that helped shape me when I became a city council member. Actually, I was a planning commissioner and then a budget committee member, city council member. All that shaped me to be a state representative, and I had no idea. And with that pragmatic approach, I had the opportunity to interview and become the state representative. And there was a gentleman by the name of Mike McLane, who I consider a good friend. He was my mentor. He had a lot of great experiences. And he's the reason why I became not just the state representative, but later became the House Republican leader like he was. And so we got a journey, we got a tale here to talk about. Mike, you grew up in Central Oregon. I grew up in a small little rural community. And why don't you tell me how, your no-nonsense mission of getting back to basics, what government should be, how all that shaped your life? You went from a kid growing up in Condon, Oregon, to law school, to joining the Army National Guard, then Air National Guard, and then you went from there. You had a law practice, became the state rep. From there, you became the House Republican leader. All those things, and then you became a judge, and now you're the senator for Senate District 30, and you got just an incredible career. And so let's kind of unpack some of that. Let's talk about your small town roots. You grew up in Central Oregon. How did that shape your mindset for what you eventually became?
Well, first, thank you for having me as a guest on the Back to Basics podcast.
You're welcome.
And I'm pleased to be a part of the Back to Basics Army.
There we go. Let's get it going.
So I did grow up in Condon, Oregon, in a very small town in Gillum County. 14 kids in my graduating class. We all fit the night before graduation in my mom's Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser station wagon.
It had wood paneling?
It did, and we had... we just cruised around town. It was a delightful place to grow up, and Condon was a typical small town where everyone knew you, and so you could only get in so much trouble, right?
Yeah, and the police knew who you were, right?
Oh, well, the county sheriff, Paul Barnett, lived across the street from me. So I could, great guy. I really liked Paul, but yes, he would periodically come by and visit us boys as we were, trying to hide beer bottles. But at any event, it really was a lot of fun growing up in the town that's in northern Central Oregon. And I did all the things kids normally do in the small town. You know, I played sports. I did
Played baseball, right? I mean, because I remember you talking about pitches and strikes and, something in one of the
baseball.
caucus
I
meetings.
loved that was my favorite sport. But I played football, basketball, and baseball because you had to, right? We didn't have enough kids, and so I got to play and enjoyed it. I made great friends, and I always wanted to, you know, grow up and be like Abe Lincoln. You know, that was the books I read. So he was a lawyer. So when someone asked me what I wanted to do, I thought, well, I'll be a lawyer. And so I went to Oregon State University and enrolled in engineering. And but then I realized not long after that that you had to be very studious. And I
Do your
had
homework, right? You had to do a lot of homework.
you had to be smart and do a lot of work. And I was in a fraternity, Alpha Gamma Rho, a bunch of small town guys, and so it wasn't long after that I decided, you know, maybe I'm not going to be an engineer. And I made a choice early on to say, well, I'm just going to take the classes I enjoy and head on to law school. So I took econ classes, a lot of econ. I graduated in agricultural resources and economics and macroeconomics really helped prepare me for law school and life because I learned that everything in the world is cabbage and non-cabbage. I had a professor who used to always say that, and it always struck me, but he said basically when you think in some sort of economic regression analysis or whatever, you can categorize things. And so it taught me early on that being focused and trying to get to what is productive and an efficient model. And so I went on to law school and I married my wife, Holly, who I met in college. And she was an FFA state president, the first female state president in the history of Oregon. She was kind of a celebrity if you're into like FFA. And so her and I got married, and we were pretty young, and I went off to law school. And I really enjoyed the people I met and enjoyed the process. And so that really shaped me. And so I did different things, and then eventually moved back to Central Oregon. My wife and I were living in Portland at the time. We had 3 small kids, and we had a great neighborhood in Northeast Portland. And I don't know, I don't think you arrested me, but
I may have patrolled those streets back in
you
the
may
day,
have
right?
patrolled them. But
What years were you there?
1994 through 2003.
Okay, so I was with the Bureau from 92 to 2017. So I'm sure we had some interaction at some point.
I'm
or
sure.
Or at least you saw the police car that had me in it at some point.
You
so-
probably pulled me over for driving confused and some of those side streets. But
I want to unpack something real quick. So you talked about, I want to talk about your roots in that small town and then going into law and then starting your own practice or being part of the practice. What do you think helped you succeed being a kid from a small town to help succeed in that legal world?
You know, I think being in a small town teaches you that you don't get to pick your teammates. And because when you're in a small town and you're on a team with, now we played 8-man football because we didn't have enough to play 11-man. And as you may know, 8-man.
It wasn't a counting problem. It was just
Yeah,
right?
no. 8-man football is a superior athletic sport. And so, but when you're in a small town with a group of folks, you don't always agree or someone may bug you on something. But in the end, you got to deal with it.
Yeah.
And if you're going to form a team and succeed, you got to work with the people you're with. And then, of course, small towns are notorious for great work ethics. I mean, people work hard there in farming and ranching and different things. And so I really learned in that town, the value of hard work. And but I also learned that, I don't want to say getting along with people, but in essence, working together, even though you don't agree or someone may be weak at something or something, that ultimately that old adage that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link.
Right.
When you're in a small town and you know, you learn that, hey, we're in this together. And I think when you grow up in an urban environment, at least I speculate, and some folks have told me, you know, if you don't get along with someone, or you find your group that, you know, you're connected with, and et cetera. In a small town, you know, there's not a lot of groups, right?
Right.
You're it. And so I think that really taught me that teams succeed together, and not everyone puts in the same amount of effort. You
Right.
have to be about the team.
So you talk about team, and you talk about your law firm and that, and then you took the leap and you went in the Army, I think it was Army National Guard and the Air National Guard, and then you rose to the rank of full colonel, and that is a feat within itself in the Air Force. I mean, you're a full bird. You're not a light colonel. You're a full bird colonel, right? A little on the heavy side.
I'm a colonel. Yeah.
Not the heavy like you're thinking weight wise, but a full colonel, right?
Well, yeah, you know, it was so interesting. I was in Portland we lived on 27th Avenue, and 9/11 happened.
Yeah, I remember that well.
I was in my 30s with 3 small kids, and the world changed.
Yep.
And my generation went to war. And I thought, well, how do I contribute? And a guy named Chris Reese, I should say, Christian Reese, was in the Guard, and he said to me, hey, we're trying to find JAGs.
If so, nobody's watching, they know what a JAG is.
A Judge Advocate General, or in essence, a military lawyer. And we're trying to recruit lawyers who have had experience and who aren't newbies out of law school, and because we know it's going to be a long war, and there's a lot of work getting soldiers ready to deploy and the legal work done and helping them, and et cetera. And so I joined because I thought, you know, if there's going to be a lot of men and women going downrange and serving in a war, then what I could contribute is making sure that their legal needs were met, their ducks were in a row, and their families were taken care of while they were deployed. And so, you know, they sent me off to boot camp, and I was older, and boot camp is not fun.
It was officer training school, whatever. It wasn't really boot camp. That was like
it was boot camp.
Okay.
And then no, it was not one of those they call salute and shoots. You know, where it's a 2-week sort of.
Yeah.
But it was more rigorous than that. But
you had your own private room, right? You sleep in the bunkhouse.
No, I wasn't in barracks because I was a lawyer. They gave me a direct commission to first lieutenant.
Oh, okay.
So the officers did not have to be in the barracks. So there were
some perks. Yeah.
There was some accoutrements that perhaps you did not experience.
Oh, I did not experience some of that stuff, right?
Yeah. So I
the
was
old lonely enlisted guy, right? And pushing the puppy around.
Yeah. Well, I still had a drill sergeant. I'll never forget Sergeant First Class Terrence Sloan, and how much he would sweat in the Virginia heat. But I never knew any man could sweat as much as he did. But at any event, I survived boot camp, and then did my basic course and et cetera. So I was, so we did a lot of work gearing up. We had Army National Guards folks deployed in Iraq, and the war had started, and so I was plugging away. And like I said, you do your weekend in 2 weeks, but when you're in a war mode, you're working all the time.
Right.
But I always felt grateful to be a part of the effort, and very focused on supporting those who are being deployed. And in fact, quite a few JAGs got deployed.
Yeah.
I wasn't. I was supposed to go to Afghanistan, and then at that point they said, "Hey, we have an opening at Kingsley Field in the Air National Guard, which is the 173rd Fighter Wing in Klamath Falls, where they do all the F-15 training for pilots and American pilots, NATO pilots.
That's the Air Force's version of Top Gun.
Yeah.
Where they go to this fighter training school.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's Top Gun. It's more of the you learn to be a fighter pilot.
Okay.
The Top Gun is where the best compete and see who's top dog. Maverick. But this was where you take pilots and teach them how to fly an F-15 and be fighter pilots. And so they didn't have a JAG, and I lived in Central Oregon. And so they asked me if I would be willing to be the JAG down at Kingsley Field. So then they transferred me from the Army National Guard to the Air National Guard.
And one step up. That was a big step
well,
up.
I'd say this. Not only are the quarters they put you in better.
Chow hall's better too. I know that for a fact.
The chow's better, but even the beer's better.
Hey, I want to go back. You talked about beer, but you talked about, you said 9/11 happened. And I remember people in moments in time, generations know where they were at when they heard Pearl Harbor, happened, when the invasion of Omaha Beach, and then the atomic bomb that was dropped, and then Sputnik was launched, and then how those things in history happened, the assassination of the Kennedys, and then Martin Luther King, and then putting a man on the moon. And, I remember the Challenger disaster. And I remember those moments. And I remember as a kid, I can remember the space launches and the old Apollo missions, but I remember as a kid in high school, the Challenger disaster and all these things that happened that shaped our lives. But I remember exactly where I was at on 9/11. I was on the Mounted Patrol Unit in Portland. We went to British Columbia up to Vancouver, BC, and we were training with the RCMP and other Mounted Patrol units. And there was Stanley Park, and I went out for my run and then came back in, and I saw these people gathered around the TV in the hotel we're staying at. What's going on? And an airplane flew into the building. I'm thinking, an airplane flew in the building. Must have been a little, general aviation airplane flew in the building. And then that next moment I looked, and then I saw the other jetliner hitting the airplane. I'm like, that's a terrorist attack. And I remember exactly where I was at, trying to make phone calls to people, how it was going on. And we were out there in the paddock area riding, and they had the jet traffic and the airplane traffic going back and forth off of Vancouver Island and all those things. And then that happened, and then they shut down the airspace and all that stuff for those days. And it's like, holy smokes, it is. It's just quiet, and there's nothing moving. And you kind of watching these reports and stuff, and it's like that sinking feeling, what just happened? Yeah. And I remember exactly that day that it happened. It's just like it was yesterday.
Yeah, I got up that morning, and, we had the 3 small kids, and we were in Northeast Portland. And so at our house in the basement, I had a home office. And I was up early and went into my home office and putting around, and I checked, the web to get the news. And
it was dial-up back then, right?
It might have been. No, I don't think so. I think, but at any event, it wouldn't load. And so I popped around to CNN and different things, and it was like, what's going on? And then I just had this thought of like, if traffic is so high, something happened. So I turned on the TV, and that's when I saw the first building. Mm-hmm. And then I was watching, and the second plane hit, and then I went, oh my God, and I just was watching it, and other kids, my oldest son was getting up. And so I turned off the TV and I went upstairs, and my wife was just getting up, and I told her. And so then it was us just turning on the TV. And not long after that, a neighbor had walked over and said, my God, do you see what's happening? And a bunch of us, just neighbors, gathered, and we ended up, at our house. And so we just started cooking breakfast, and people were just in shock.
Yeah. So I can tell you, like, for me, my small town values growing up in the farm and ranch in Nebraska, and, my grandparents and my great uncle were all part of that greatest generation. My uncle was in the Army, was at Omaha Beach, and then pushed in, and they had the Western Telegram would send these things, updates. And they got the one that says, regret to inform you that your son has been listed as missing in action. And then they called him, and then they called it killed in action. The next one was killed in action. And then like a month later showed, hey, we are pleased to inform you that your son has been found in a field hospital and he's resting in France, but will be going to the front lines and the march into Germany. And congratulate, basically, hey, you're there. And
My word.
it's just that role. And then I've had my other uncles, my dad was in the military. That's what kind of drove me there, and that duty to service. But for you in a small town, what was that, being in a small town, that inkling to want to serve? I know you talked about 9/11, but is there something from your small town that made you like, I want to do this?
I graduated from high school in 1983, so it was post-Vietnam era.
Mm-hmm.
And we were, Reagan had been elected, and that was inspiring to be, in essence, it was okay to be proud of your country.
Yeah.
And I remember being proud of my country. I knew when I was in high school, I did a senior paper on Vietnam War and some of the vets, and I talked to some of the Vietnam vets in town, and I remember interviewing two of the guys I interviewed. Both said to me that was the first time since getting back they'd been asked about the war. And so, it was like 10 years after they returned. And they both had very different stories. And I remember just thinking how sad. These guys served their country. They fought in a war. They had different experiences, but that they hit it. I didn't understand that. And I was too little to really know what was going on at the time.
Yeah.
But that affected me, like, no, we should be proud. Our veterans should be celebrated, and those who are making sacrifices need to be supported. And so that did shape me in part, in being in the town that was very patriotic.
Yeah.
I knew a lot of World War II vets. I had teachers, that I had were World War II vets. And so it really just made me puzzled. Like, what happened in Vietnam where there was a sense of regret, or that the vets weren't supported. And so I think after 9/11, when I realized, okay, we're going to war. This is I had this sense of duty. It's my time to serve, my generation to serve. How can I contribute? And maybe it was when they saw my ability to shoot a rifle, they said, you are going to be a JAG. But I think in the end, I just thought we need to support these folks who are leaving their families and are going into harm's way, need to be supported and honored. Right. And I think that part was that legacy growing up in a town where being a senior in high school and talking to some of the Vietnam vets and realizing that didn't happen for them.
Right.
And it should have.
I think, talking to my dad, he was part of that generation of Vietnam. And I think that the first Gulf War, Desert Shield, Desert Storm kind of was an exorcism of those demons for that generation, that they saw, hey, this actually the country's patriotic, and we went in and took care of business. And it's kind of interesting to hear in that. I want to fast forward. You've committed to a lot of different things in your life, that, law school, you have your practice, JAG. I want to talk, 3 or 4 minutes about, you became the state representative for House District 55. What precipitated, and what was your motivation to do that? Because we know it pays so well at $33,000 a year. We get the arrows in the front, the knives in the back, and nobody's ever happy with you. So we're doing our job right, it seems like.
Well, after the financial crisis and the Great Recession, in my particular district, it was depression statistics. It was very bad. Crook County, my home county at that point, that's where I had moved to and raising my kids. The unemployment was in the 20%. It may be higher. I mean, the construction came to halt so it was really bad. And I really felt like this was a major turn, and that if we're going to come back in the way where people can prosper in the small rural areas that I represented, we're going to have an opportunity for their kids to come home and choose and have jobs, and that there needed to be an aggressive focus on restoration and investment in small areas and those east of the mountains, but to emphasize economic development. And so it was a sense of like, hey, this is serious. And in the slide from the timber wars, there was so much at work, and so there'd been so many hits taken by small towns in Oregon. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to do what I can to help Crook County, Lake County, Klamath, some of these small areas that I'm representing, and we got to be aggressive about figuring out how we're going to provide good jobs and opportunities for our kids and the like. So I ran on that motivation, and I was elected and assigned to the budget committee. And there were 9 of us Republicans elected there.
10 or
2010. So it was kind of a wave election.
Right.
And Republicans did very well. So there was a lot of Republican freshmen, but I was the only one assigned to just budget committee. But I learned our state government. I learned how the money's appropriated, the agencies. It really taught me. Now,
Greg Smith talks about the color of money, right? Color of money.
It is. And Greg was there, and there were others who were Ways and Means guys that really helped me understand the budget and state government. And it was, I was envious a little bit of my fellow freshmen who were on policy committees, and there were cool issues and et cetera. And I was stuck learning about ODOT's budget and, all this stuff.
Fast forward to $1.8 billion hole we got right now, but that's another episode. That's another episode of Back to Basics.
Yeah. So I was motivated to help. And so I became aggressive about any opportunity that could help my district or other districts east of the mountains to make sure the state government was an advocate, not an adversary, but an advocate for good jobs and economic growth.
Yeah. So at some point, you and I's careers kind of paralleled. You took the leap to become House Republican leader and served in that role not that long ago. It's a thankless job. You put a lot of work in, and
it has its own unique rewards.
It does have rewards, right? It can be the most rewarding yet frustrating job you can ever have.
It can be. Being the minority leader, especially in the House, you've got a lot of caucus members, and you don't have authority, right? You can't appoint people to committees. Right. You can't, but what you try to do is find out how to keep us all moving in the same direction.
Right.
And
I call that herding cats.
Perhaps. And so I became the Republican leader in November after the election in 2012 and served for 6 years there. And many wonderful experiences and great relationships. And I learned that ultimately politics is about relationships. Mm-hmm. And if you are able to put forth the best ideas, and they may not always get accepted by the majority party, but if you're willing to earnestly contribute, and you can make headway. Right. At the same time, one of your jobs is being the opposition and trying to frustrate their efforts to run the table with ideas that aren't going to be helpful to Oregon.
Right.
And so you have to have, I think, the ability to jump into multiple places quickly. And I enjoyed the experience. But, Oregon chose one party to be in charge of all facets of government, executive branch, legislative, and frankly, judicial. And, so that means that often ideas that could be helpful are ignored. Right. I had to remind the speaker at the time, who's now our governor, Tina Kotek, that bipartisanship is not everyone coming around her ideas. That bipartisanship is allowing everyone to have input.
Right. Absolutely.
And, there were days she would agree, and then there were days where she would not. And she would move the agenda of her party and her political views and exclude our input. And but by and large, other than the fights we had, to a large degree, there was a consensus on how to move things forward.
I remember, on the House floor, you would close with whatever contentious bill was on there, and you'd sit there and speechify. I'm like watching you and looking at her, a little smirk that she kind of smiles at you from the dais and stuff. I'm like, holy smoke, this guy's good.
Well, one thing that being the Republican leader means is that often it's your job to call out and to press on buttons that our Democratic colleagues don't like being pushed.
Yeah, and it makes them squirm in their seat a little bit.
A little bit. And, but, politics it is a contact sport.
Yeah, people are policy, right?
Right.
It truly is.
And so you have to be willing to compete to be effective. And, but you also have to choose your battles.
Right. Not everything can be a battle.
Not everything can be a battle.
So I think I've asked you this before, but what's the moment that tested you in that role as leader? And how did your small town, what lessons was there that kept your word and kind of got you through whatever moment that was? Because I remember my moment, like, okay, I didn't see that coming. Here we go.
Well, we had, I don't know if there's any one moment, but I was in a caucus with 26 members, including me. So, I didn't choose who districts sent as their state representative. And so again, you have to form a team. And when you're in the minority, unity is essential for there to be the ability to navigate by saying, hey, we're not going to agree to a tax increase, but we may agree to this, we may agree to that. And so part of it is leveraging whatever position you had and to get, to make sure your folks in your districts weren't left behind in appropriations. And for an example, if the state was going to make a contribution or investment in a medical clinic, there's needs all over the state.
Right.
And so, you have to be able to say, hey, just because, we're a Republican district in Wallowa or, Union County or something, they should have equal opportunity to have state contributions and help their communities. And so, keeping alliances. So what taught me in a small town, I go back to that, is you don't get to choose your teammates.
Yeah, that's a really good one right there, because you don't.
You don't, and you still got to move forward and do all you can to compete effectively and win to the extent that the rules of the game allow you to win. So when you're in a minority position in the House, 34 Democrats, 26 Republicans, you're going to lose a vote, right? So you're not going to get to be speaker. You're not going to, but ultimately the goal is at 26, what can we do to kill bad bills What can we do to make sure our communities have equal footing with the urban communities when it comes to investments and other things? But having unity, and that just takes understanding people and having patience. And I think growing up in a small town taught me that.
Yeah. So after you stepped away from being leader, and then you stepped away from the legislature, became a judge. And I'm going to go back to your small town roots because I think that's a theme just for me a little bit where my district's at, but also that's who shaped us as people, is where we came from. But your roots in a small town, your time as not only state representative but the House leader, and then your guard. How did that all shape how you approached the bench when you sat on the bench?
Well, the preeminence of the rule of law, that ultimately people need to know that when they go into a forum, they're heard and the law is going to be applied without bias, without preference, that the rule of law, and that part of our justice system is that people get an opportunity to be heard, and making sure that people understood that the courtroom was a place where we're going to make decisions, and not everyone's going to agree. But our belief in the system, and that it's fundamental fairness, and that you do have an opportunity, and you're going to have a judge there who's going to follow the law and listen to your arguments and the facts, and make good decisions based upon the evidence. And so that I carried forward from all my different service. Now, I went on the bench and I had an opportunity. I was being considered for the federal bench, and I was not selected. And so I thought, well, I'm here and I'm going to do the best I can. And then the world changed. And the world changed because COVID hit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the social justice riots were folks that were very frustrated with the justice system. And then there were folks that were frustrated because property laws were being ignored. And then you had January 6th. You had all these things that happened after I got to the bench. You had cancel culture. And I observed almost a disintegration of the rule of law, and that common sense that this republic that we all have and are stewards of to give to the next generation, that there was fraying of, if you will, of the edges going on. And so after watching all this happen, and it became very hard not to be an advocate. When you're on the bench and wearing that robe, you can't be an advocate. And it became clear to me that this decade was the most important of my lifetime. That not only because of our national debt, there's going to be changes, but that our culture was dividing and there was hostility. And I just thought, you know what? I need to go back to advocacy. It's something I do well and I'm passionate about. So I had to choose, in essence, between advocacy and being a judge. And I thought, if I'm going to engage in what I think is a critical decade for the country and our state, I have to hang up the robe. And so I made the decision to go back to my law firm and go back into advocacy. I enjoyed being a judge. I would say half the job of being a judge is incredibly satisfying and enjoyable, doing the jury trials and being involved in big issues. And then the other half is it's very routine and a lot of work. I've heard it said it's being a social worker with a robe. and you're just
Yeah.
involved in a lot of situations where you're seeing this same group of folks, and so for me anyway, I just felt like I could do this job, and it's an honor to serve. But deep down, I was an advocate at my heart, and I think had the world not changed, I would still be a judge.
Yeah.
But the world changed, and I just had to make a decision. Am I going to engage in this critical decade in our country's history, in our state's history, as an advocate? And so I went back to advocacy and enjoy it. I'm still a partner in the law firm, still representing clients, folks who've been abused by power, whether they're employees or in other situations, people dismissed because of their political viewpoints. So I feel very strong that ultimately, nobody, if you're a Republican or conservative in a blue state, or you're a liberal in a red state, nobody should be discriminated against because of their political viewpoints or their religious allegiance. And so I never thought I'd be back in the legislature. Never thought I'd be back. But
Yeah, that's going to be my next question for you, right? So you decided to jump back into the legislative body. You ran for Senate District 30. You won. And so when you got pulled back in, so from being a judge, the small town perspective that you had, and all the roles that you had from the judge to now, how do you think, from being the representative and House leader, how do you think all those lessons learned is on the bench and being the advocate in your law firm, how do you think that's going to change the way you may legislate? And if it would at all, or what lessons learned are you going to apply moving forward?
I did not think I'd be back in the legislature, but it was an open seat, and I had, I was encouraged to run. My wife, who knows me better than anyone else, just said, "Hey, this is important. You should do this." And so for me, it's advocacy. Whether I do it in a law firm, whether I do it in the National Guard, as now the state judge advocate overseeing the legal affairs for the Army and Air National Guard, and working with our adjutant general. And, it's still advocacy. And I see my role in the Senate as advocacy, that ultimately I'm advocating for a district, but I'm also advocating for the core values of the rule of law. Oregon is a state that should not be biased in its administration of government against conservatives or Republicans or libertarians or anybody who doesn't happen to be in the majority. And I feel strongly about that. And of course, as I mentioned to you, I think there is a budget reckoning coming at the federal government.
Yep.
That's going to have cascading effects on the various states, and Oregon is not immune. And we're going to have to come up with a consensus on how much government we want to pay for it and what mission our government's doing. I think the state government has undergone mission creep, and we're going to have to realign that. And so I see my role as just being an advocate and trying to get us back into alignment of what was the purpose of it under our Constitution, and to make sure that the people are getting effective and competent government that's within our means, because we're going to have to retire, or at least do our duty to this generation to not pass on continuing debt. When I say retire, meaning retire the debt, or at least make
Service
sure
the debt so it's not out of control.
Well, yeah, if you look at our Constitution, the preamble, One of the last phrases it says in the U.S. Constitution before the words "we ordain and establish," this government, it says to secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity. And the function of the federal government is to secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity. Liberty is a blessing, and it requires each generation to secure it. And it's not just for ourselves. It's for our children, grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, etc. So how does our grandchildren or great-grandchildren secure the blessings of liberty when a nation hands them 60 trillion in debt, 70? I mean, it's a generational theft. It's wrong. It's immoral. Our generation has to right that wrong. In this decade, we have to make the choices to do that, or we're going to be subject to third parties and events that we don't like and can't control, and it's going to make the decisions for us. We have to right the ship. And I came back to serve in the legislature at our huge salaries.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. But, to be a part of that. Again, it's not unlike why I served, after 9/11. I may not be able to do much, but what I can do, I should do. And if I can support those who are in harm's way. And so that's why I became a JAG. But now it's saying, hey, look, I understand the voters of the state of Oregon chose one party to be in charge of every facet of our government. But that doesn't mean we just sit back and say good luck. It means we need to engage, and we need to advocate for the values that make this republic great, and we need to advocate for our districts and to make sure our children and grandchildren have the same opportunities. I'm very concerned that this decade that Oregon is not appreciating what they face.
Yeah. So we're getting close to the end of the wrapping up podcast. I got one last question for you. I'm not going to let you get it off by saying teammates, because you only had to choose your teammates. So you went from a small town in north central Oregon, state representative, House leader, judge. Now you're a senator in Senate District 30. What is one no BS lesson from your small town experience that's guided you through it all?
I was working for Bryce Logan, who was a guy that I think he was 5 or 6 years older than me, but his dad had run a custom wheat cutting outfit, and Bryce was taking over and doing it. And I got hired in high school to drive wheat truck during wheat harvest. And I remember being frustrated. I'm sure, I forget, maybe I was 17 or 16, I can't remember. And, we all get frustrated at different things. And I said to him, I wish there was a book that just had the answers. And he said to me, there is. And I said, what is it? And he said, the Bible.
Yep.
And he wasn't wrong.
Full of life lessons.
It is a great book. And so that's something I took from my small town. I may not always understand the Torah and the writings and the prophets and the what's called the the Renewed Testament, the Gospels and the writings of Paul and Peter and the rest. But one thing I do know is in it is not just answers, but wisdom. I think a lot of people want to change the world, but I think what we do is change ourselves, and that impacts the world for the good. And I believe Bryce was right. That book does have the answers. I won't begin to tell other people how they should read it, but I would encourage them to read it.
Yeah. Mike, thanks for being my guest on the Back to Basics podcast. I truly mean it. I consider you a friend. You helped mentor me through my early political career, which I didn't know was going to land me as following your footsteps to being the leader. And, eventually, who knows what the future is going to hold for me. Maybe I get to go hang out with you a little on the other side of the other chamber. So I don't know. Who knows what's going to happen in life. But that being said, I really appreciate your friendship, your mentorship, and all those things. Mike, I really do.
Thank you. And it has been an absolute pleasure to be on Back to the Basics podcast.
Yeah.
What do you call your followers? Your army?
Yeah, the Back to Basics Army.
Yep. Dude,
Sign
I'm
you
not
up?
a colonel. Am I a colonel?
Hey, I'll let you carry your rank over. I'll let you carry your rank. You don't have to go to boot camp. So, people, I want to say thank you for joining in. I don't have sponsors or anything like that, but we're here to fix the problems that are in front of us in a pragmatic way. We got to get back to basics in government. We can't spend a bunch of money, but share. And if you get the content, you can send me some messages, what you want to see in future episodes, but we got a bunch of episodes we're going to be running out. But so remember, get on Back to Basics Army, join the movement, and let's get Oregon back on the right track. Have a great night.